She sights her wealthy CEO ex in a wheelchair, sitting alone at the wedding. Her little son called him Daddy. The champagne flute trembled in Olivia's hand as her world collapsed into a single point of focus. There he sat, Jackson Reed, alone in his wheelchair at the edge of the reception, watching guests twirl across the dance floor with hollow eyes that no longer commanded boardrooms. "Mommy, who's that man?" Oliver tugged at her emerald dress, his curious gaze fixed on Jackson. "Just someone I used to know," Olivia whispered, her throat constricting. But Oliver had already slipped from her grasp, drawn across the room by some invisible thread. Olivia lunged after him, her heart hammering against her ribs, but the crowd swallowed her son before she could reach him. By the time she broke through the sea of wedding guests, Oliver had already climbed onto Jackson's lap, his small hands framing the face that was a perfect mirror of his own. "Daddy," Oliver said with absolute certainty. "I found you." The champagne flute shattered against the hardwood floor. Every conversation around them seemed to freeze mid-syllable. Jackson's face drained of color. His hands, once steady enough to sign billion-dollar contracts, trembled as they hovered over Oliver's shoulders, afraid to touch what couldn't possibly be real. "I knew it was you," Oliver continued, studying Jackson's face with fearless curiosity. "You have my eyes." Jackson's gaze lifted to Olivia, a silent plea for explanation, for forgiveness, for something she wasn't sure she could give. "I dreamed about you," Oliver whispered. "Mommy keeps your picture in her jewelry box. Sometimes she looks at it when she thinks I'm sleeping." Olivia stood frozen, watching her carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. 4 years of rebuilding, of protecting them both from this exact moment, and now her son was climbing onto the lap of the man who had once broken her so completely. "Why didn't you come find us?" Oliver asked, settling against Jackson's chest with complete trust. "Have you ever witnessed a moment so raw, so unexpected, that it feels like the universe itself has orchestrated it? If you've ever wondered whether people can truly change after making devastating mistakes, you'll want to hear every word of this story. Because what happened next would challenge everything Olivia thought she knew about forgiveness, second chances, and the healing power of a child's love. 4 years earlier, Olivia Parker had been a rising star in the physical therapy department at Mountain View Medical Center. She'd built a reputation for her exceptional work with trauma patients, her gentle hands coaxing broken bodies back to strength with equal parts science and compassion. Jackson Reed had been anything but broken when they met. As the ruthlessly efficient CEO of Reed Healthcare Systems, he'd acquired Mountain View as part of his expanding empire, arriving like a storm in an impeccable suit to assess his latest investment. "Your rehabilitation department shows impressive outcomes," he'd said during their first encounter, scanning her department's performance metrics on his tablet. "But your equipment is outdated. We'll need to modernize." "Our equipment works just fine," Olivia had replied, unintimidated by his authority. "What makes our outcomes impressive is our staff, not our machines." She'd expected anger at her contradiction. Instead, Jackson had looked up from his tablet, truly seeing her for the first time. Something flickered in those steel gray eyes. Surprise, respect, perhaps even a hint of amusement. "Show me," he'd challenged. For the next hour, Olivia had led the imposing CEO through her department, demonstrating techniques that couldn't be replicated by technology, introducing him to patients whose progress defied medical expectations. By the time they'd finished, Jackson's clinical detachment had softened into something warmer. "Have dinner with me," he'd said as they reached the lobby. "No longer a demand but a request. I want to hear more about your approach." Their first date had stretched from dinner into a midnight walk along the riverfront, professional discussion evolving into personal revelations. Jackson had described growing up as the son of a legendary healthcare pioneer, the crushing weight of expectations, the loneliness of leadership. Olivia had shared her own story, raised by a single mother who'd sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. Driven by a desire to heal after watching her grandfather's difficult recovery from a stroke. "You're nothing like I expected," Jackson had admitted as he walked her to her door. "Is that a good thing?" she'd asked. His kiss had been her answer, gentle at first, then hungry with a need that surprised them both. What followed was a whirlwind romance that defied every warning Olivia had given herself about workplace relationships. Jackson pursued her with the same focused intensity he brought to acquisitions, sending wildflowers to her apartment because roses seemed too conventional, whisking her away on his private jet for weekend escapes, listening with genuine interest to her ideas about patient-centered care. "You make me want to be better," he'd told her one night as they lay tangled in his sheets. "Less of a businessman, more of a human." For 6 perfect months, Olivia had believed she'd found the extraordinary kind of love that transformed people. Jackson had softened around her, laughing more easily, spending less time at the office, even implementing some of her rehabilitation philosophy throughout his hospital network. Then came the pregnancy test with its 2 pink lines, and everything changed. Olivia had planned the moment carefully. A quiet dinner at her apartment, candles, his favorite pasta dish. She'd imagined joy, excitement, perhaps a moment of nervous anticipation before they began planning their future together. "I'm pregnant," she'd said, reaching for his hand across the table. She'd watched his expression transform, not into the joy she'd hoped for, but something cold and calculating that turned her blood to ice. "How did this happen?" he'd asked, pulling his hand away. "We were careful." "Sometimes careful isn't enough," she'd replied, her voice small as her dream began to fracture. "But Jackson, this is our baby. A little piece of both of us." He'd stood abruptly, pacing to her small living room window. "This isn't the right time, Olivia. The merger with West Coast Health launches next month. The board is watching my every move. I'm not asking you to make an announcement at the shareholders meeting," she'd said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm telling you we're having a child. Do you understand what's at stake?" His voice had hardened. "My father built this company from nothing. The board already thinks I'm distracted. A pregnancy scandal would give them exactly what they need to force me out." The word scandal had struck like a physical blow. "Is that what our child is to you? A scandal? Be realistic," he'd snapped. "I know doctors who can handle this discreetly. I'll arrange everything." Olivia had stared at him, unable to reconcile this cold stranger with the man who'd whispered love against her skin just nights before. "Handle this? This is our baby, Jackson. A life we created." "I'm not ready to be a father," he'd said, his voice suddenly weary. "My father was a disaster as a parent. That damage follows me every day. I won't do that to a child." "Then, I'll do it alone," she'd said, a calm certainty settling over her despite the earthquake in her heart. "I don't need your permission to have this baby, and I won't let you make me feel like I should be ashamed of it." "Don't be naive," he'd countered. "You can't raise a child on a physical therapist's salary in this city. Watch me." Jackson had left her apartment that night with promises to think about it, to find a solution, but Olivia had already seen the truth in his eyes. There would be no compromise, no change of heart. The next morning, his assistant had called to schedule a meeting with Jackson and his lawyers. That was when Olivia knew it was truly over. She didn't attend that meeting. Instead, she'd packed 2 suitcases with essentials, withdrawn her modest savings, and bought a bus ticket to Portland, a city where she had a distant cousin and the possibility of a fresh start. The only trace she'd left behind was a letter, not angry or accusatory, just heartbreakingly honest. She told him about the morning sickness that had already started, about how this child would know they were loved, even if he couldn't see past his own fears to recognize the gift they'd been given. By the time Jackson returned to his penthouse that evening, Olivia had vanished, leaving behind the designer clothes he'd bought her, the jewelry that now felt like payment rather than gifts, and every other reminder of the life they'd almost built together. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing, you'll understand why what Olivia did next was nothing short of extraordinary. Starting over in a new city with a baby on the way and a broken heart would have defeated many people. But for every person who's faced impossible odds and somehow found the strength to continue, this part of the story is for you. The tiny apartment in Portland's rainy east side became Olivia's sanctuary. With peeling paint and unreliable heating, it was a universe away from Jackson's luxury penthouse. But it was here, in this humble space, that Olivia discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. Her cousin Mia had helped her find a job at a small rehabilitation clinic that couldn't afford to check references too thoroughly. The pay was less than half what she'd earned at Mountain View, but the owner, an elderly physical therapist named Ruth, recognized Olivia's talent immediately. "Your hands know things your mind hasn't even learned yet," Ruth had observed, watching Olivia work with a stroke patient. "That can't be taught." Morning sickness became Olivia's constant companion, forcing her to keep crackers by her bedside and ginger tea in her thermos. Some days, she'd find herself retching in the clinic bathroom between patients, then returning with a professional smile that betrayed none of her exhaustion. At night, alone in her apartment, she'd talk to her growing belly, making promises to the child inside. "We're going to be okay, little one. Mama's going to make sure you have everything you need. Everything except a father." Oliver was born on a snowy Tuesday morning in January, after 20 hours of labor that Olivia endured with only Mia by her side. No partner to hold her hand through contractions. No proud grandparents rushing to the hospital with gifts, just her, and the incredible strength she hadn't known she possessed until she had no choice. "He has your nose," the nurse had said, placing the swaddled newborn in Olivia's arms. But Olivia had seen only Jackson in those stormy gray eyes, in the determined set of his tiny jaw. The resemblance was like a physical ache, a reminder of what she'd lost and what Oliver would never know. What Olivia couldn't possibly have known was that at the exact moment Oliver drew his first breath, Jackson Reed was sitting alone in his penthouse office, staring at her letter, now worn from countless readings, and the sonogram image she'd enclosed. He'd been searching for her for months, hiring private investigators who came back empty-handed, as if Olivia Parker had simply disappeared from the face of the earth. The weeks after Oliver's birth passed in a sleepless blur. Olivia learned to nurse while reviewing patient files, to function on fractured sleep, to find joy in small moments despite bone-deep exhaustion. Ruth had been unexpectedly understanding, allowing Olivia to bring Oliver to the clinic when childcare arrangements fell through. "Babies belong where healing happens," the older woman had said, cradling Oliver while Olivia worked with a patient. "They remind us why we fight to recover." As months became years, Olivia built a life that was modest but rich in the ways that mattered. Oliver grew from a serious infant into a curious toddler with boundless energy and an old soul's wisdom. Their tiny apartment filled with colorful plastic toys, finger paintings taped to refrigerator doors, and the kind of happiness that can't be measured in square footage. The first word Oliver spoke wasn't mama as Olivia had hoped. It was Dada, said with such hopeful expectation that it twisted the knife deeper. "Dada," he'd repeat, looking around their small living room as if expecting someone to appear. "It's just us, sweetheart," Olivia would tell him, her heart breaking all over again. "Just you and mama." But as Oliver grew, his questions became more specific, more difficult to answer. "Where's my daddy?" he'd ask, watching father-son pairs at the playground. "He couldn't be with us," Olivia would say, because despite everything, she couldn't bear to poison her son against his father. "Why not?" Sometimes grown-ups make choices that are hard to understand. "Does he know about me?" The hardest question of all. "Yes, he knows about you. Then why doesn't he want me?" How could she explain to a 4-year-old that some people aren't ready for love's greatest responsibilities? That fear can make even the strongest people run from the things that matter most? Instead, she'd gather him close and whisper, "Anyone who knows you would want you, Oliver. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." At night, when Oliver was asleep, Olivia would sometimes take out the photograph she kept hidden in her jewelry box, Jackson smiling at her across a candlelit table before everything fell apart. Not because she still loved him, she told herself, but because someday Oliver might want to know where he came from. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in New York, Jackson Reed was building his empire higher while his soul crumbled to dust. The merger with West Coast Health had gone through flawlessly. Reed Healthcare had expanded into 3 new states. Jackson's net worth had doubled, then tripled. He had everything he'd fought for, except the woman who had disappeared with his child. What Olivia didn't know was that Jackson had spent a small fortune searching for her. Private investigators had followed every lead, chased every trail, only to find dead ends. He'd realized too late, after reading her goodbye letter 100 times, after sitting in an empty room he'd secretly started designing as a nursery before panic overtook him, that he'd thrown away the only thing that truly mattered. The accident happened 18 months after Oliver's birth. Jackson had been racing to another acquisition meeting, his mind calculating profit margins instead of watching the icy road ahead. The SUV that hit his town car had been traveling at 60 miles per hour. His driver had died instantly. Jackson had survived, but his spinal cord hadn't. When the investigators examined the wreckage, they found something puzzling. Hundreds of printed profiles of women matching Olivia's description in cities across the country, and a worn photograph of a smiling woman with her face circled in red. The hospital psychologist who'd been assigned to Jackson's case after he'd lashed out at every physical therapist said something that finally broke through his defenses. "Sometimes the universe takes away our ability to run, so we can finally learn how to stay." Jackson's transformation hadn't been immediate. For months, he'd raged against his broken body, fired more therapists than he could count, and driven away the few people who still cared enough to visit. But slowly, painfully, something had begun to shift. He'd started a foundation, not for the tax breaks or good publicity, but to provide physical therapy services to children whose families couldn't afford them. He'd redesigned his hospital's pediatric wing to be more welcoming, more human. He'd learned to listen to his staff, to see them as people rather than resources. And he'd never stopped looking for Olivia and the child he'd thrown away. What he didn't know was that his search had nearly succeeded several times. The anonymous grant that had helped Ruth's clinic stay afloat during a difficult year? That came from a foundation Jackson had established. The children's therapy equipment that arrived mysteriously at their door? Funded by a subsidiary of Reed Healthcare, though the connection was buried under layers of corporate structure. He'd been taking care of them from a distance, invisible and anonymous, loving them the only way he knew how. If this story is touching your heart, make sure to like and subscribe for more powerful stories about love and redemption. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come after what we think is the end. The wedding invitation that would change everything arrived at Olivia's mailbox on a rainy Tuesday in April. Kate Winters, her former colleague from Mountain View Medical Center, was marrying her longtime girlfriend at a mountain resort in Aspen. "You have to come," Kate had insisted during their monthly phone call. "Jen and I won't take no for an answer. It's been too long since we've seen you and Oliver in person." Olivia had hesitated. "Travel with a 4-year-old isn't easy, Kate. We've arranged everything. A family suite, childcare during the ceremony, activities for kids. Plus you need a vacation. When was the last time you left Portland?" What Kate hadn't mentioned was that she'd also invited Jackson Reed, her new employer at the Reed Children's Rehabilitation Center in New York. Some connections were too complicated to explain over the phone. And so fate had orchestrated their collision on a perfect June evening in the Colorado mountains. With alpine wildflowers scenting the air, and aspen leaves trembling in the gentle breeze, Jackson's arms came around Oliver carefully, as if the boy might dissolve if he held too tight. 4 years of grief and desperate longing poured from his eyes as he looked down at his son. "I made some very bad mistakes," he said, his voice thick. "I hurt your mommy badly. But you're sorry now?" Oliver asked with the piercing insight only children possess. "More sorry than you could ever know." Oliver nodded seriously, processing this with all the gravity a 4-year-old could muster. "Everyone deserves a second chance if they're really, truly sorry," he declared. "That's what mommy always says." Olivia felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crack. This wasn't the cold, calculating businessman who had dismissed their child as a scandal. The man in the wheelchair was looking at Oliver with reverence, with a love so raw it was almost painful to witness. "Oliver, sweetheart," she said, her voice barely steady as she approached. "We should let Mr. Reed enjoy the party." "But he's not enjoying it," Oliver protested, settling more firmly on Jackson's lap. "He's all alone, and his eyes are sad." Jackson looked up at her, and Olivia saw raw vulnerability in his expression that she'd glimpsed only in their most intimate moments years ago. "It's okay," he said softly. "I don't mind." "Do you know my mommy?" Oliver asked, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "Yes," Jackson answered, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face. "I knew her a long time ago." "Before I was born?" "Yes." Jackson's voice grew rough. "Before you were born." Oliver studied Jackson's face with the fearless attention only children possess. "You look like me, see?" He pointed to his own eyes, then to Jackson's. "Same color." "Yes," Jackson agreed, something like wonder creeping into his expression. "We have the same eyes." A server approached, carefully sweeping up the broken glass at Olivia's feet. The momentary distraction gave her time to compose herself, to build walls around her heart that had begun crumbling at the sight of her son in his father's arms. "Oliver, it's getting late," she said. "We should head back to our room." "Can Mr. Reed come read me a story?" Oliver asked. "He tells good stories, I can tell." "How could you possibly know that?" Olivia asked, bewildered. Oliver shrugged with 4-year-old certainty. "His voice sounds like stories." Jackson's laugh, rusty from disuse, held no trace of the cold, calculating man who had dismissed their child as a scandal. This laugh belonged to someone else entirely. "I'd be honored to read you a story," he said, "but only if your mother says it's okay." They both looked at her, identical gray eyes filled with hope. And Olivia felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. "One story," she conceded. "Then, bed." The family suite Kate had arranged was rustic luxury, all stone and timber with panoramic views of moonlit mountains. Oliver chattered excitedly as they rode the elevator, asking Jackson questions about his wheelchair, about why he was at the wedding, about whether he liked dinosaurs or dragons better. Jackson answered each question with a patience Olivia had never seen in him before. This wasn't the man who had paced impatiently through business calls. This man listened as if Oliver's opinions on prehistoric creatures versus mythical ones were the most fascinating discussion he'd ever had. "Dragons," Jackson said seriously, "because they can fly even though they're big. That's how I feel in my wheelchair sometimes. Big but flying." Oliver's eyes widened. "You can fly?" "Not literally," Jackson smiled. "But sometimes when I'm moving fast down a hill, it feels like flying." "Can I ride with you sometime?" Oliver asked. Olivia's heart clenched. She wasn't ready for promises, for future plans, for anything beyond this strange, surreal evening. "Oliver," she interrupted gently, "Mr. Reed is busy with work. He's an important businessman." "Not as important as I used to be," Jackson said quietly. "I've learned what actually matters." The weight of unspoken history hung between them as Olivia unlocked the suite door. Oliver immediately ran to his backpack, pulling out a well-worn storybook about a lost penguin finding its way home. "This one," he declared, handing it to Jackson. "It's my favorite." Jackson wheeled himself next to Oliver's bed, while Olivia busied herself in the bathroom, needing a moment alone to process the earthquake reshaping her landscape. Through the partially open door, she watched Jackson reading to their son, his voice gentle as he asked Oliver questions about the story. Listened to his answers as if they contained profound wisdom. This wasn't the ruthless CEO who had thrown away their future. This was someone else entirely, someone who looked at Oliver with reverence, who handled him with tender care, who seemed to understand the miracle he had been given. After the story, after Oliver's prayers and goodnight kisses, after promises to see Jackson again tomorrow at the wedding brunch, Olivia walked him to the door of their suite. "He's extraordinary," Jackson said softly. "You've done an incredible job with him, Olivia." "I had to," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He needed one parent who wouldn't let him down. Jackson flinched, but didn't argue. "I deserve that. I deserve much worse." "Why are you here, Jackson? At this wedding?" "Kate runs my pediatric rehabilitation center in New York. When she invited me, I thought—" He trailed off. "You thought—" "I thought maybe I could do one normal thing, be part of something joyful for once." He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "I never imagined I'd find you both here." "Well, you have," Olivia said, crossing her arms. "What now?" "Now I ask for something I don't deserve. A chance to explain. Not to justify what I did, but to tell you what happened after. To show you who I've become. And if I say no?" Jackson's hands tightened on his wheelchair's armrests. "Then I'll respect your decision. I'll keep my distance at the brunch tomorrow. I'll leave you both alone if that's what you truly want." The sincerity in his voice made her waver. The Jackson she'd known would have steamrolled her objections, would have used his power and influence to get his way. "1 hour," she said finally, "after Oliver's asleep tomorrow night. 1 hour to say whatever you need to say." Relief flooded his expression. "Thank you." As the door closed between them, Olivia leaned against it, her heart pounding. She'd spent 4 years running from this man, building a life without him, convincing herself she'd healed. Now here he was, transformed by circumstances she couldn't have imagined. Looking at their son with all the love she'd once prayed he would feel. She didn't know if she could trust this change. She didn't know if she should. But as she checked on Oliver, sleeping peacefully with a smile on his lips, she knew that something inevitable had been set in motion. Her son had recognized his father across a crowded room, had called him daddy with absolute certainty. Some connections, it seemed, transcended time and distance, and even betrayal. Wedding brunch the next morning was held on a sunlit terrace overlooking snow-capped peaks. Oliver spotted Jackson immediately and ran to him, climbing onto his lap as if he'd been doing it his entire life. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. Did you know there's a moose by the pond? The lady at the front desk said we might see him if we're quiet." Jackson glanced at Olivia, silently asking permission. She nodded once, tight but accepting. Would you like to go look for him after breakfast? Jackson asked Oliver. Yes. Oliver bounced with excitement. Can Mommy come too? I wouldn't have it any other way, Jackson said softly. Their unlikely trio drew curious glances as they ate breakfast together. Oliver chattering about moose facts, Jackson listening with rapt attention, Olivia watching this unexpected connection unfold with guarded hope. Kate stopped by their table, her wedding glow intensified by the mountain sunshine. I see you two have reconnected, she said, squeezing Olivia's shoulder. You might have mentioned he would be here, Olivia murmured. Would you have come if I had? Kate asked quietly. Olivia had no answer for that. After breakfast, they took the nature trail that wound around the resort's pond. Oliver ran ahead, then back, then ahead again, a perpetual motion machine fueled by excitement and mountain air. He has your energy, Jackson observed. And your kindness. He has your eyes, Olivia said. And your determination. I looked for you, Jackson said suddenly. For years. I hired investigators. I followed every lead. I didn't want to be found. I know that now. He navigated his wheelchair over a bumpy section of trail. After the accident, after I lost everything I thought mattered, I realized what actually did matter, and it was too late. What happened? Olivia asked, the question she'd been holding back since she first saw him in the wheelchair. Black ice. January 2 years ago. My driver didn't survive. His voice grew hollow. I wasn't supposed to either. Love stories have the power to heal, inspire, and connect us all. At Cedar Light Love Stories, every tale is a spark waiting to touch your heart. Don't just watch, be part of this journey. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's create a circle of love together. Oliver shouted from up ahead, pointing excitedly at something in the trees. They caught up to find him staring at a massive bull moose browsing on willow branches, seemingly unbothered by his audience. He's beautiful, Oliver whispered, standing perfectly still for perhaps the first time in his life. Jackson reached for Olivia's hand. She allowed the contact, feeling calluses that hadn't been there before, strength, built from pushing himself through a world not designed for wheels. I establish pediatric therapy centers now, he said quietly as they watched the moose. Free treatment for families who can't afford it. I'm trying to use what's left of my life to do something that matters. The Centers for Childhood Mobility, Olivia said, realization dawning. That's you? He nodded. After months of physical therapy, I understood what it means to struggle with your own body. I wanted to help children have better outcomes. My clinic received a grant from that foundation last year, she said. We were able to get new equipment for our cerebral palsy patients. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. I know. I approved it personally. You knew where I was? Anger flared, hot and sudden. Not until after the grant was processed. One of my staff recognized your name on the application. By then, it felt wrong to approach you. Like I'd be using the foundation's resources to manipulate a connection. He looked at her directly. I wanted to come to you as someone worthy of knowing you and Oliver, not as the man who once hurt you. The moose lumbered away, disappearing into the forest. Oliver ran back to them, bursting with excitement, climbing onto Jackson's lap without hesitation. Did you see how big he was? His antlers were like this. He stretched his arms wide. Very impressive, Jackson agreed, his arms coming around Oliver protectively as they started back toward the resort, watching them together. This man who had once rejected the very idea of fatherhood, now holding their son with such care. Olivia felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. If you've ever witnessed someone truly transformed by life's hardest lessons, you know that redemption isn't just a beautiful story, it's a choice made day after day, proven through actions rather than words. As Olivia was about to discover, sometimes the most profound changes come from facing our greatest fears. That evening, after Oliver had fallen asleep surrounded by toy moose purchased at the resort gift shop, Olivia and Jackson sat on the suite's balcony. The mountains loomed dark against a star-scattered sky, their massive presence a reminder of how small human concerns could be. I was terrified of becoming my father, Jackson said, breaking the silence. He was brilliant but cold, demanding perfection but offering no affection. My mother left when I was 6. He raised me like a business project rather than a son. Olivia listened, seeing pieces of their past realigning in this new light. When you told me you were pregnant, all I could think was that I would damage our child the way he damaged me, that some cycles can't be broken. He looked at his useless legs. It took losing my ability to walk to learn how to stand as a man." "What changed?" she asked. "Everything." His laugh held no humor. "After months of rage and self-pity, my therapist asked me what legacy I wanted to leave. All I could think about was the child I'd thrown away, the family I could have had." He met her gaze. "I realized I'd become exactly what I feared, my father's son, putting ambition above love. And now? Now I'm trying to become the man who deserves to know his son, who deserves your forgiveness, even if I can never earn back your love." The honesty in his voice stripped away her defenses. This wasn't the calculated charm he'd once wielded like a weapon. This was raw vulnerability, a man with nothing left to hide. "Oliver asked about you," she admitted. From the moment he could speak, as if he somehow knew a piece of himself was missing. "Children know things we've forgotten how to understand," Jackson said softly. A comfortable silence settled between them, not the absence of words but the presence of understanding. "I'm not asking for promises," Jackson said finally. "Just a chance to know him, to be whatever kind of father he needs, even if that's just a friend who shares his eyes." Olivia thought about the photograph she kept hidden in her jewelry box, about the moments she'd catch herself wondering if Jackson would be proud of Oliver's latest accomplishment, about how completely her son had recognized his father across a crowded room. "We live in Portland now," she said. "Our whole life is there. Oliver's preschool, my work, our friends. I can open a center in Portland," Jackson said without hesitation. "My work can happen anywhere. Yours can't." The old Jackson would have expected her to reshape her life around his. This man was offering to reshape his around theirs. "One step at a time," Olivia cautioned. "Oliver gets attached quickly. I won't let him be hurt." "I would cut off my own arms before hurting him," Jackson said with quiet intensity. She believed him. The next morning, Oliver didn't ask if Jackson was joining them for breakfast. He simply assumed it, rushing to get dressed so they wouldn't be late meeting his new favorite person. As they entered the restaurant, his small hand slipped from Olivia's to scan the room, his face lighting up when he spotted Jackson waiting at a corner table. "He saved us seats by the window," Oliver announced, already racing across the restaurant. Throughout breakfast, Olivia watched their interactions with a mixture of wonder and caution. Jackson had somehow intuited Oliver's preferences, cutting his pancakes into precise triangles rather than squares, remembering that he liked his syrup in a separate cup for dipping, asking questions. That allowed Oliver to share his extensive knowledge of dinosaurs. "T-Rex had the strongest bite of any land animal ever," Oliver explained seriously, demonstrating with his own chomping motion. "But his arms were too short to reach his mouth, so that's sad." "Very sad," Jackson agreed. "How would he brush his teeth?" Oliver's laughter, bright and uninhibited, drew smiles from nearby tables. He'd never been this animated with strangers, usually hiding behind Olivia's legs until he'd thoroughly assessed new people. With Jackson, there was no hesitation, no shyness, just an immediate, instinctive trust that both warmed and worried Olivia's heart. "The wedding's at 4, she reminded them, as Oliver began explaining his theory about why dinosaurs would make terrible pets. "We should probably get ready around 2. "Can I show Jackson the game room first?" Oliver asked. "They have air hockey." "If Jackson doesn't mind," Olivia said carefully. "Nothing would make me happier," Jackson replied, his eyes reflecting a joy she hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. The game room was mercifully empty when they arrived, allowing Oliver to bounce between activities without worrying about taking turns. Jackson proved surprisingly competitive at air hockey, laughing as Oliver celebrated each goal with increasingly elaborate victory dances. "He's never been this comfortable with someone new," Olivia observed as they watched Oliver tackle a racing game. "It's like he's known you forever." "Maybe part of him has," Jackson said quietly. "I know that sounds ridiculous, but—" "It doesn't," she interrupted. "He's been drawing pictures of a man in a wheelchair for months. I thought he'd seen it in a book or on TV. Now I'm not so sure." Jackson's expression shifted to something between awe and heartbreak. "What else has he done that you couldn't explain?" "He woke up crying on the anniversary of your accident. Said he had a dream about a car breaking and someone being hurt." She met his gaze. "I checked your company's press releases later. The dates matched." "I died on the operating table," Jackson said, his voice barely audible. "Just for 90 seconds, but the doctors said it happened. January 17th. That's the night he woke up screaming." They fell silent, watching Oliver navigate a virtual racetrack with intense Concentration, unaware of the cosmic connection being discussed behind him. "I don't know what to do with that information," Olivia finally said. "Neither do I." Jackson's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "But it makes me wonder if some connections can't be broken, even when we try to break them ourselves." The wedding ceremony was held in a glass pavilion overlooking the valley, with mountains framing the couple like nature's cathedral. Oliver sat between Olivia and Jackson, solemnly holding a program he couldn't read but pretended to follow. When the brides exchanged vows, promising to choose each other through all of life's challenges, Olivia felt Jackson's gaze on her face. She didn't turn, afraid of what her expression might reveal. That part of her was remembering their own promises, whispered in the darkness of his penthouse bedroom 4 years ago. "Are they married now?" Oliver whispered, as the couple shared their first kiss. "Yes," Olivia whispered back. "They'll be together, forever. Like a family?" "Exactly like a family." Oliver nodded, processing this information with 4-year-old gravity before looking up at Jackson. "Do you have a family?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of meaning expanding outward. Jackson's throat worked as he searched for an answer. "I'm working on it," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. At the reception, Oliver charmed everyone he met, proudly introducing Jackson to other guests as "my friend who knows about dragons and dinosaurs." Olivia noticed how carefully he avoided the word daddy, as if sensing the complexity adults had created around a relationship that seemed perfectly simple to him. When the dancing began, Oliver watched with fascination as couples moved across the floor. "Do you dance, Mommy?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not often." "What about you?" Oliver turned to Jackson. "I used to," Jackson said. "Before my accident." Oliver's brow furrowed in concentration. "Can you dance in your chair?" "I've never tried," Jackson admitted. "You should," Oliver decided. "With Mommy. She looks pretty in her blue dress, and pretty ladies should dance." Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Oliver, Mr. Reed might not want to." "I'd be honored," Jackson interrupted. "If your mother wouldn't mind." The question in his eyes took her back to their first meeting. The same cautious hope, the same vulnerability beneath confidence. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. As the band shifted to a slower song, Jackson wheeled himself to an empty space at the edge of the dance floor and held out his hand. Olivia stepped forward, suddenly unsure of the mechanics. "I've never done this before," she admitted. "Neither have I," he smiled. "We'll figure it out together." She placed her hand in his, then let him guide her to sit on his lap. Her arms coming around his neck as his wrapped around her waist. They began to move, Jackson gently turning his chair in slow circles as they swayed to the music. "Everyone's watching," she whispered. "Let them," he replied. "I'm only seeing you." For a moment the years between them collapsed. They were just Jackson and Olivia again, moving together with the natural rhythm they'd discovered that first night by the river. His hand warm at the small of her back, her cheek against his shoulder, both pretending this was simple when nothing between them had ever been simple. From the side of the dance floor, Oliver watched with wide eyes, then turned to Kate who had settled beside him. "Are they in love?" he asked bluntly. Kate considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "What do you think?" Oliver studied his parents thoughtfully. "I think maybe they forgot for a while, but they're remembering. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say." If this story is touching your heart, take a moment to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the most profound truths come from those who see the world with untainted eyes. When the song ended, Olivia moved to stand, but Jackson's arms tightened slightly. "One more?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. She should say no. She should maintain the careful distance she'd established. She should protect her heart from this man who had once shattered it so completely. "One more," she agreed instead. As they moved together through a second song, then a third, Olivia felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to consider that the man holding her was not the same one who had sent her running 4 years ago. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of cake and toasts and laughter. Oliver eventually fell asleep in Jackson's lap, his small body going limp in the complete trust of childhood. Jackson held him with such tender care that several wedding guests commented on what a beautiful family they made. "He's not," Olivia began to correct a well-meaning elderly woman, then stopped herself. Because biologically they were a family, genetically, the connection was undeniable. It was every other definition of family they had failed at. "Thank you," she said instead, watching Jackson's face as he gently stroked Oliver's hair. Later, after they'd carried a still sleeping Oliver back to their suite and tucked him into bed, Olivia and Jackson returned to the balcony where they'd talked the night before. The mountains were invisible now in the darkness, but their presence could be felt, ancient and immovable. "I have a house in Portland," Jackson said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I bought it 2 years ago when I expanded the Foundation's West Coast operations. I've never lived in it." "Why not?" "Because it wasn't meant for me, it was meant for us. If I ever found you, if you ever gave me another chance." He looked at her directly. "It has wheelchair ramps and adapted bathrooms. A bedroom on the ground floor for me, and upstairs, 2 more bedrooms I had designed thinking of you and a child I'd never met." Olivia stared at him. "You built a house for a family you didn't have?" "I built it for the family I threw away," he corrected gently. "I built it as an act of hope. Or maybe penance." "Jackson, that's crazy, presumptuous, desperate?" He smiled sadly. "Yes. All of those things. I was going to say overwhelming. I'm not asking you to move in. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give." His hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "But I am asking if I can be part of Oliver's life, even if it's just occasional visits, even if you never forgive me completely. He deserves to know his father, and I—" His voice broke. "I need the chance to love him." Olivia looked at this man who had once been the center of her world, then her greatest heartbreak. The Jackson she'd known wouldn't have asked. He would have demanded, manipulated, used his power to get what he wanted. This Jackson was offering her all the control, all the choice. "He needs stability," she said finally. "Consistency. If you're going to be in his life, it can't be when it's convenient for you. It has to be a commitment." "I'll move to Portland permanently," Jackson said without hesitation. "I'll buy a house near yours. I'll see him as often or as little as you're comfortable with. I'll follow any guidelines you set. And when he asks why you weren't there before, I'll tell him the truth, that I was afraid, that I made the biggest mistake of my life, that I've spent every day since regretting it." His eyes held hers. "I won't make excuses, Olivia. I won't pretend I was right." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. This was what she'd needed 4 years ago. Not justifications or settlements, but simple accountability. "We'll start slow," she said. "Weekend visits. Then we'll see." The relief on his face was palpable. "Thank you. I don't deserve this chance, but I swear I won't waste it." "No," she agreed. "You won't. Because if you hurt him, if you disappoint him even once, I'll disappear completely," he finished for her. "You'll never have to see me again." Olivia nodded, sealing the agreement between them. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a beginning. 2 weeks later, Jackson Reed moved into a modest rental house 3 blocks from Olivia's apartment in Portland. The Children's Mobility Center announced a new flagship location in the city, with state-of-the-art equipment and sliding-scale fees to ensure no child was turned away for financial reasons. Oliver's first visit to his father's house was a study in barely contained excitement. He talked of nothing else for days, peppering Olivia with questions about what they would do, what Jackson's house looked like, whether he could bring his favorite dinosaur figures. "Do you think he has cookies?" Oliver asked as they walked the 3 blocks. "Kate said his chef makes the best cookies." "I don't know if he has a chef here," Olivia cautioned, not wanting Oliver to be disappointed. But when Jackson opened the door to welcome them, the scent of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies wafted out. The house was modest by Jackson's standards, a single-story craftsman with a ramped entrance and widened doorways. He'd clearly chosen it for functionality rather than luxury, though the furnishings were beautiful in their simplicity. "I made cookies," Jackson said, answering Oliver's unasked question. Or tried to. The first batch was a little crispy. "You baked?" Olivia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "I've been taking classes," he admitted. "Cooking from a wheelchair is challenging but not impossible. I wanted to learn to make things Oliver might like." The revelation was another piece of evidence that this Jackson was fundamentally different from the man she'd known. The old Jackson had staff for every domestic task. This one was learning to bake cookies for a 4-year-old. Oliver raced through the house, exploring every corner with the enthusiasm only children possess. He returned to report his findings with scientific precision. "You have a big TV and lots of books, and a room with a desk and a special Bathroom with bars on the wall and a backyard with a swing. He delivered this inventory in one breath. But there's another room with nothing in it, just a bed. That's for guests, Jackson explained, but his eyes met Olivia's over Oliver's head. It was the room he'd designed for their son in the house he'd never lived in, recreated, here in smaller scale, waiting to be filled with a child's belongings. That first visit stretched from the planned 2 hours into an entire afternoon. They baked a second, more successful batch of cookies. Jackson read 3 books, each with different voices for the characters that sent Oliver into fits of giggles. They built an elaborate fort in the living room using couch cushions and blankets, then ate their cookies inside it while Jackson told stories about dragons who couldn't fly until they learned to believe in themselves. When it was finally time to leave, Oliver threw his arms around Jackson's neck in a fierce hug. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. "That's up to your mom," Jackson said, looking to Olivia for guidance. "How about next weekend?" she suggested, seeing the disappointment flicker across both identical faces. "Saturday morning. We could go to the park if the weather's nice." The park. Oliver's excitement instantly returned. "Can we feed the ducks?" "Absolutely," Jackson promised. "I'll bring the bread." As they walked home, Oliver skipping ahead and then waiting for Olivia to catch up, she found herself reflecting on the day. She'd expected to feel anxious, protective, perhaps even resentful watching Jackson bond with their son. Instead, she'd felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief that Oliver would know his father's love. Relief that Jackson was proving to be the man she'd once glimpsed beneath the ambition and fear. "Mommy," Oliver called, interrupting her thoughts. "I like my daddy. He makes good cookies and tells the best stories." "Daddy," she repeated, the word still strange on her tongue. "When did you start calling him that?" Oliver looked confused by the question. "He is my daddy." "You said so." "Yes. But how did you know to call him that? Did he ask you to?" Oliver shook his head. "I just knew. Like how I know when it's going to rain, or when you're sad even though you're smiling. I just know things sometimes." The simplicity of his explanation made Olivia's throat tight. Children did just know things sometimes. Truths adults had forgotten how to see. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm none of them could have predicted. Saturday mornings with Jackson became a standing tradition, sometimes at his house, sometimes at the park, occasionally at the children's museum or aquarium. Oliver blossomed under the dual attention, bringing home artwork from preschool, labeled for daddy with the same frequency as those marked for mommy. Jackson never pushed for more than Olivia offered, never attempted to rush the careful rebuilding of trust between them. He attended Oliver's preschool graduation, sitting at a respectful distance from Olivia but close enough that Oliver could see them both. He sent birthday party invitations to Oliver's friends, coordinating every detail with Olivia first. He learned Oliver's bedtime routine so he could follow it on the rare evenings Olivia allowed their son to stay for dinner. And something else was happening, something Olivia wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. She was beginning to look forward to their exchanges at drop-off and pick-up. To value Jackson's insights about Oliver's development. To appreciate the way he considered her opinion in all decisions related to their son. 3 months after that first visit, Jackson attended his first physical therapy appointment. Not as CEO or benefactor but as a patient. The therapist had been blunt in her assessment. "You've plateaued because you're not pushing yourself," she'd told him. "Your upper body strength is exceptional, but you're relying on it too much. There are techniques that could help you gain more independence." Oliver had been fascinated by his father's therapy, watching with serious concentration, as Jackson worked through exercises designed to improve his transfer techniques. "Can I help?" he'd asked the therapist. "Actually, you can," she'd replied, showing him how to hand his father small weights and count repetitions. Watching them work together, Oliver solemnly counting 1, 2, 3, 4 while Jackson patiently corrected 3, buddy, not free. Olivia had felt something shift inside her heart. This wasn't the same man who had dismissed parenthood as an inconvenience. This man was showing their son that challenges could be faced with grace, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that asking for help was an act of courage. The invitation that changed everything came 6 months after their reunion in Aspen. Jackson had called Olivia rather than discussing it during one of their handoffs. A sign that he considered it too important for a casual conversation. "The foundation is having its annual fundraising gala next month," he explained. "I usually attend alone, give a speech, shake hands with donors. But this year I was wondering if you and Oliver might come as my guests." The hesitation in his voice made it clear what he was really asking: permission to introduce them publicly as his family. That's a big step, Olivia said carefully. People will make assumptions. Let them, Jackson replied, echoing his words from their dance months earlier. I'm proud of who we are, whatever that is. I'm proud of our son. I want people to know that. Our son. The words sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. I'll think about it, she promised. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Olivia took out the photograph she kept in her jewelry box. Jackson smiling at her across a candlelit table from what felt like another lifetime. She studied his face, trying to reconcile the man she'd loved with the one who had broken her heart, with the one who was now rebuilding a life that included them both. The truth was, she'd been falling in love again, not with the old Jackson, but with this new version who had been forged through loss and regret. This Jackson who baked cookies and attended therapy, and looked at their son like he was the greatest miracle in the world. But loving him again was terrifying. Trusting him again seemed impossible. She was still debating the gala invitation when fate intervened in the form of a midnight phone call from the hospital. Oliver had spiked a dangerous fever. His breathing labored enough that Olivia had called an ambulance. Now she sat beside his hospital bed, watching helplessly as doctors worked to identify the infection raging through his small body. I'll be right there, Jackson had said when she'd called, his voice clearing instantly from sleep to alert concern. He arrived 20 minutes later, his wheelchair moving with urgent purpose through the pediatric ward. Olivia had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. What are they saying? He asked, taking her hand as they both looked at Oliver, pale and small against the white hospital sheets. Possible pneumonia. They're running tests. Her voice cracked. His fever won't come down. Jackson's grip tightened on her hand. What can I do? You're already doing it, she whispered. Being here. They sat together through the night, taking turns holding Oliver's hand, wiping his forehead with cool cloths, murmuring reassurances when he stirred in restless sleep. When the diagnosis finally came, a severe case of pneumonia requiring IV antibiotics and close monitoring, they received it together, asking questions and discussing options as a united front. The doctors spoke to them both, naturally assuming they were a couple. Neither corrected the assumption. On the second night, when Oliver's fever finally broke and he drifted into more peaceful sleep, Olivia found herself slumped against Jackson's shoulder, her own exhaustion finally claiming her. You should go home, he said softly. Get some real rest. I'll stay with him. I can't leave him, she protested. You're not leaving him, you're leaving him with me. His eyes held hers. I won't let anything happen to him, Olivia, I swear it. The complete trust she felt in that moment surprised her. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, a gesture of gratitude, of connection, of something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Thank you, she whispered. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb gently stroking her cheekbone. Go rest. We'll be here when you get back. When Olivia returned 6 hours later, showered and changed, she found Jackson reading quietly to Oliver, who was sitting up in bed looking pale but dramatically improved. Mommy, Oliver called, his voice weak but excited. Daddy stayed all night. He didn't even sleep. He needs to rest too, Olivia chided gently, noticing the dark circles under Jackson's eyes. I'm fine, Jackson insisted, though the exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. Your turn to go home, she said firmly. We need you healthy too. The way Oliver beamed at the word we told her she'd made the right choice of words. After a week in the hospital, Oliver was finally released with instructions for follow-up care and medications. Without discussion, they all went to Jackson's house, which was more accessible for his wheelchair and had the additional advantage of being on one level, meaning Oliver wouldn't have to climb stairs to a bedroom. Just until he's stronger, Olivia had told herself. Just for a few days. A few days became a week. A week became 2. Oliver thrived under their combined care, his recovery progressing faster than the doctors had predicted. Each night, Olivia told herself she should take him home to their apartment. Each morning she found another reason to stay. They fell into a routine that felt dangerously like family life. Jackson would make breakfast while Olivia helped Oliver with his breathing exercises. They would eat together at the kitchen table, planning the day's quiet activities to keep Oliver entertained while he recovered. In the evenings they would watch movies or read books, Oliver nestled between them on the couch. After Oliver was asleep, they would talk for hours, about his progress, about their own childhoods, about everything except the growing tension between them, the unspoken question of what happened next. On the night before Oliver's follow-up appointment, when his recovery seemed complete and there was no longer any medical reason to remain at Jackson's house, Olivia finally voiced what had been building inside her. "We should talk about what happens now," she said as they sat on the back patio, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "What do you want to happen?" Jackson asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I don't know." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild evening. "This past month has been confusing. For me too," he admitted. "Having you both here, it's been everything I never knew I wanted 4 years ago, everything I've dreamed about since I realized what I threw away. Oliver loves it here. Loves having both of us in the same place." "And you?" Jackson asked quietly. "What do you love, Olivia?" The question hung between them, loaded with 4 years of history, of pain, of gradual healing. "I love who you've become," she finally said, the admission costing her more courage than she'd expected. "I love watching you with our son. I love seeing you overcome challenges that would destroy most people. But I'm terrified." She met his gaze directly. "Terrified that if I trust you again, if I let myself love you completely, you'll revert to the man you were. The man who saw our child as an inconvenience. The man who could throw us away." Jackson wheeled closer, close enough to take her hands in his. "That man died in the accident," he said with quiet intensity. "He died, and I was reborn into someone who understands what matters. Someone who would never, ever take you or Oliver for granted. How can I be sure?" "You can't," he said simply. "That's what trust is, a leap of faith. All I can do is spend every day proving to you that your faith isn't misplaced." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking for everything at once. I'm asking for a chance to keep showing you who I am now, to keep building this family one day at a time." Family. The word resonated through her like a bell, clear and true. "The gala," she said suddenly. "When is it?" "Next weekend." "Why?" "Because I think it's time we stopped hiding what we are." She took a deep breath. "Time we showed Oliver that his parents are united, whatever that looks like." The hope that bloomed on Jackson's face was almost painful to witness. "Are you saying yes to the gala?" "I'm saying yes to trying," she clarified. "I'm saying yes to seeing where this goes. I'm saying yes to believing people can change." Jackson brought her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverence. "That's more than I deserve, more than I ever hoped for." "It's what Oliver deserves," Olivia said softly. "A chance for his family to be whole." The night of the gala arrived with flurries of excitement and nervousness. Oliver had been fitted for his first suit, a miniature version of Jackson's tuxedo, complete with bow tie that he insisted on tying himself, resulting in a charmingly lopsided effect that neither parent had the heart to correct. "We match," he'd announced proudly, standing beside Jackson's wheelchair and striking an identical pose. "The handsomest men in Portland," Olivia had agreed, her heart catching at the sight of them together. So clearly father and son, so clearly meant to be in each other's lives. Her own gown was a deep emerald that Jackson had sent without comment, somehow remembering her exact size despite the years between. When she'd emerged from the guest bedroom where she'd been getting ready, the look in his eyes had been worth every moment of uncertainty. "You're beautiful," he'd said simply, the words carrying the weight of history, of longing, of possibility. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of Portland's oldest hotel, transformed for the evening into an elegant wonderland of twinkling lights and flowing champagne. As Jackson's wheelchair moved through the crowd, Olivia at his side and Oliver walking proudly. Between them, conversations paused, heads turned, curious eyes followed their progress. Jackson had been a fixture at these events for years, always alone, always somewhat remote despite his philanthropy. The presence of a woman and child beside him sparked immediate speculation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced as they reached the head table, "our host for the evening, Mr. Jackson Reed, CEO of the Children's Mobility Foundation, and his family." Family. The words settled around them like a blessing. Later, when Jackson took to the stage to deliver his speech, he departed from his usual statistics and accomplishments to speak from the heart. "4 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," he began, his gaze finding Olivia in the crowd. "I let fear dictate my choices. I threw away what would have been the greatest gift I could ever receive, the chance to be a father." A murmur ran through the audience. This was not the polished professional address they had expected. "2 years ago, an accident took away my ability to walk. But it gave me something far more valuable, the understanding of what truly matters in this life." His voice grew stronger. "Not stock prices or acquisitions or corner offices. What matters is love. Family. The courage to admit when you're wrong, and the humility to ask for second chances." Oliver, sitting beside Olivia, listened with unusual stillness, somehow understanding the importance of the moment. "The work we do at the foundation isn't just about mobility aids or therapy equipment. It's about giving children the freedom to become who they're meant to be. It's about giving families the support they need during the hardest challenges of their lives." Jackson's eyes shone with emotion as he continued, "I understand those challenges now, not just as a CEO, but as a father who nearly lost the chance to know his son, as a man who's been given a second chance at building a family with the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Olivia felt tears spill down her cheeks, unchecked and unashamed. "Tonight, I'm asking you to support our mission not because it's tax deductible or good publicity, but because every child deserves to know they are valued. Every family deserves the chance to stay together, even when the path forward seems impossible." The applause when he finished was thunderous, but Jackson's attention was fixed solely on Olivia and Oliver, making their way to the stage to join him. As cameras flashed and donors reached for their checkbooks, the Reed family stood united for the first time in public. Not perfect, not unmarked by their journey, but whole in a way that honored both what was lost and what was found. 6 months later, Olivia stood in the doorway of Oliver's bedroom in their new home. Not the house Jackson had built in anticipation, but a different one they had chosen together. A home that represented their fresh start, with space for Oliver to grow, wheelchair accessibility for Jackson, and a therapy room where Olivia could work with special cases. Oliver was fast asleep, surrounded by dinosaur figures and books about space exploration, his face peaceful in the glow of his nightlight. Jackson wheeled up beside her, his arms sliding around her waist as they watched their son sleep. "He asked me something interesting today," Jackson whispered. "What's that?" "If he would have a brother or sister someday." Olivia turned in his embrace, studying the face that had once been the source of her greatest pain, now the foundation of her deepest joy. "And what did you tell him?" "That it was up to his mother." Jackson's fingers traced the engagement ring he'd placed on her finger a month earlier. Not in a grand gesture, but during a quiet moment watching Oliver on the playground. "That some families grow quickly, and others take their time." "Wise answer," she murmured, leaning down to kiss him. "I've learned from my mistakes," he said against her lips. "Some lessons you only need to learn once." As they moved away from Oliver's door, toward their own bedroom at the end of the hall, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From heartbreak to healing. From rejection to redemption. From broken pieces to family. Their story wasn't perfect. The scars of the past would always remain, visible in moments of doubt, in careful conversations about the future, in the way Olivia sometimes still held part of herself in reserve, afraid to trust completely. But it was their story, messy and miraculous, and still being written day by day. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances are possible. Subscribe to Cedar Light Love Stories for more stories that warm your heart and remind you that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Because in a world full of brokenness, we all need to believe that what's shattered can be made whole again. Perhaps not perfect, but stronger in the places where it was broken.